Welcome everyone, Rilus Dana here. We're coming at you with another episode of the Professional Network. We're not live this time, but what I do in the show is I do my networking on video. So instead of getting coffee or going to lunch,
we make it available for everyone to see.
Right.
Yeah. So they can crawl under the sheets with us a little bit, right?
Yeah. So I think this is a good way to, for your audience to have a chance to get to know me, another attorney.
Sure.
And then the way we met was through your Altcs work for another for a mutual client.
Yeah.
But do you want to introduce yourself? Let everyone know your name,
sure,
your company.
Yeah. So I'm John Michaels. I have two first names, so a lot of people call me Mike.
Me too.
Yeah, you do, right?
Well, my first name's weird, Rilus. People don't know what to do with it.
I think that's a cool name.
And then Dana's like a first name.
Yeah, 100%. So we have the same problem.
Yeah, we got that in common.
So I'm sure people call you Dana from time to time. People call me Mike all the time, but it's John Michaels. Name of the firm is Stronghold Financial. And our website, for those that might want to go check it out, www.strongholdfin.com. And we have kind of two businesses in one. One area of our business is wealth management, which is fiduciary investment advice and financial advice, money management for high net worth.
Explain the fiduciary really quick. I think a lot of people probably know what that is, but I like that as an attorney.
I love when people ask me that question.
Yeah.
So a fiduciary is a professional who has certifications and makes an oath that that all of the actions that they take must be in the best interest of their clients, even if it's to our own detriment. So that's a fiduciary. So for example, a stockbroker is not a fiduciary, right? The stockbroker's job is to get you to buy and sell as many shares of stock as they can because they ring the register and get a commission for every time that you trade. But as a wealth advisor, my job is to do the right thing by the client all the time, 100% of the time. And I'm upheld by SEC and FINRA, which are, I'm sure people have heard of the SEC, but FINRA is a federal financial organization that sort of oversees people in my role to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, so that's a good distinction. If you're looking for a financial advisor, that's a big difference. Someone who's acting as a fiduciary. I recently had a client complain to the bar, and I was joking to my team. I was like, "Oh, that's what we get with being a professionally licensed company."
Right.
People get that security, no matter how dumb it is. They can go back to our regulators and air any grievances.
Yes, they can. And you can go to finra.com and do it's called a broker lookup or an agent lookup, and you can type in my name. Jonathan Michaels is my full name, and you can see any complaints against me, which I don't have any as of now. But you can kind of see my license number, and you can see when I was licensed, and you can do that for any fiduciary advisor. So that's one side of the business. I like to say I help rich people get richer, because that's true. Like that's sort of the nature of the job. But I also help them level up the rest of their lives too, because I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had a number of different companies throughout my life. So I provide not only financial consulting, investment advice, but also business advice, business consulting as sort of part of that whole package. The area that I think you want to talk about today is the other side of our business.
Yeah, that's cool too, the business, and I like all of that. But yeah, I wanted to focus on this, the Altcs today.
Yeah.
That's the other side,
so
right?
We help elderly people, particularly, and their families figure out, how am I going to pay for long-term care? Assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing. You reach a stage of life where you need help. You need assistance with particularly the activities of daily living, or ADLs as they're known. And it's really expensive. It's in Maricopa County, it's an average of $8,000 a month to receive any form of long-term care. Now, some places, it's an average. So some places are cheaper, other places are more expensive. But on average, $8,000 a month. And guess what percentage of the seniors in Maricopa County have budgeted for, it's less than 20%, have budgeted for the eventuality of long-term care. And 4 out of 5 people over the age of 60 today, if you take a slice of all of those people over the age of 60, 80% of them are going to need long-term care at some point in their life, but only 20% have budgeted for it. So when they're in crisis and they're like, oh my God, what do I do? They come to Stronghold Financial and we help them figure it out.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of people that need, and there's not a lot of good solutions, I would say.
No,
So, and
there's not.
there's a lot of crossover, I would say. It's not really crossover, maybe people view it. So people come to see me and I focus on, estate planning. The main thing is just avoiding probate.
Right.
People come and say, I want to avoid probate.
Yeah.
I want to make sure my assets are protected from a nursing home and also in case of a car accident. It's like those are all very different things, So
sure.
the estate planning is kind of like the basic, I say.
Right.
Helping you set things up to pass.
Yeah.
Or for someone to manage upon your disability. But the Altcs planning can be very different. It is very different. It's its own animal.
It's a financial exercise. So what you do obviously is a legal exercise, and you leverage, the law of the state of Arizona and Maricopa County to protect people legally and financially. But what you do is a legal exercise. What I do is a financial exercise. I'm helping people get on a program that's going to protect them financially. And we also put, processes and parameters in place that protect their assets as well. But it's much more of a financial exercise than, setting up a trust, for example.
Yeah. So people always ask me, it's like, can I do this? Can I do that? It's like, I don't know. It depends. We say a lot in the legal, but the same thing with the Altcs. You really got to crunch the numbers.
Let's talk about Altcs. Let's talk about what it is.
Yeah.
Because we're spewing acronyms right now. Altcs, nobody knows what that, unless they do. But so Altcs is an acronym, and it stands for the Arizona Long-Term Care System. So this is
it the same as Medicaid?
Great question. It's actually a division of Medicaid. So what I'd love for you and your audience to do is think of Medicaid like a tree with two big branches. And one branch is health insurance for people with low income. And in Arizona, that's known as AHCCCS, AHCCCS, the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. Boom, that's one branch of the tree with the two branches. The other branch is Altcs, which is the Arizona Long-Term Care System, which is designed to help pay for people whose income is below their cost of care for the long-term care that they need. And again, long-term care is assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing, in particular, those three things. And you can be receiving those three things in one of two settings. You can either be receiving those services in home, or you can be receiving those services in a facility or a community. So depending upon, so all those parameters kind of define, if you're getting that care at home or in a facility, you're getting long-term care. And the bad news is Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. It doesn't cover it. So people who think, I've paid into Medicare my whole life, I'm covered. You're not. So if you fall and break a hip and go to the hospital, and then you go to rehab, and then you go to long-term care because you need that level of care and recovery, you're not going to get covered by Medicare for long-term care. So what do? You either pay out of pocket, or you have long-term care insurance, which you would have had to have had the foresight to buy years and years and years, maybe decades ago.
And hopefully it still is a good policy and
all that,
meet
right?
your needs.
Yeah. And then the third option, if you can't pay out of pocket and you don't have long-term care insurance, which most people can't, right? 80% of people can't. The only other option they have is Altcs, the Arizona Long-Term Care System, which is that division of Medicaid, which will basically pay the gap between whatever your income is and your monthly cost of care. So just using round fake numbers, let's just say your monthly income is $2,000 a month, Social Security, and your cost of care is that $8,000 average I was telling you. So you've got a $6,000 gap, which over the course of a year is $72,000. And you're like, oh my God, what do I do? Altcs will pay that gap between the $2,000 and the $8,000. So it's an incredibly valuable program for people who need it. The problem is it's a federal and state program with all kinds of complications and confusions, and it's not easy to get on. Most people, lay people, right, non-attorneys, non-financial advisors, that try to do Altcs themselves, that try to fill out an Altcs application and get a loved one on the Altcs program themselves, get declined. 90% of the time they get declined. And if they do end up getting on the program, it takes them longer than 6 months. Well, if you're paying $8,000 a month for long-term care, right? And you have to wait 6 months. What's 8 times 6? That's how much money you pay.
54.
Something like that, right?
Timetables.
48. I don't know, but
was it 48?
I think
okay.
it's 48.
48. Okay, that's wrong.
But something. The point is, you're paying that money. It's gone and gone forever. When if you would have gotten on the Altcs program in say 4 weeks, okay, you write one check for $8,000, but then the bleeding stopped. Right?
Yeah, that's why it's really worth it. I encourage people to get help when they're applying because it is so difficult. And for what you just described, if you screw up, it's going to be another 6 months
Yeah.
before you try again.
And you're writing that $8,000 check month after month. So it's so stressful. People come to me and they're in tears because they're just so stressed and overwhelmed. And usually it's the spouse of the person who needs care, or it's a child or children of the people who need care. I had a woman I spoke to, Andrea, this morning. Obviously, I won't disclose her full name, but I can disclose her first name. Andrea was calling on behalf of her uncle. And her uncle had a heart attack late last year. And he ended up in a hospital who discharged him to a long-term care facility that basically neglected him. It completely neglected him. And his condition, I mean, he was near death. And Andrea was like, I haven't talked to Uncle Dave in a while. Where's he at? And no one knew because he was single and alone. So she finally figured out where he was, called the hospital. Hospital said, here's the rehab you went to. Rehab said, here's the long-term care. And she went there and saw him and she was appalled at his condition. I mean, he was down to 105 pounds. This is a guy who was 180 pounds when he was functioning. So he's down half his weight. He's not eating. He's got sores all over his body. And she's like, you clearly need care. You're not getting it here. So she wants to move him to Arizona and get him on Altcs, which I think is the right move. But I hear these types of stories all the time, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. So, a lot there. But one thing is preparing to go to the state. That's a good idea, right? So, and I liked your two branches of how you described this. What I tell people is, Medicaid is kind of the federal name, but some of the money comes from the state government and some from the federal.
That's right.
So that's why it's so complicated. So Arizona is the gatekeeper here.
Yes.
So you have to go through their systems here.
That's right.
But there may be some overarching things.
Yeah, and for people that that care about this, let me kind of give you some details. So all 50 states have a long-term care division of their Medicaid program, and every state calls it something different. In Idaho, guess what it's called? Idaho Medicaid. Really original.
I know
Here,
it's Medi-Cal in California.
In California, it's Medi-Cal, and here it's Altcs, and every state calls it something different. 49 states use federal guidelines to create their eligibility requirements for their program. Guess which state is the outlier?
Us?
California.
Oh, yeah.
Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal completely rewrote the book on how to do Medicaid, and they do it completely different than everyone else.
Yeah, I know it's different than Arizona.
It's different than everyone.
I'm a California attorney too.
Yeah.
At one point in my career, I did a little Altcs planning for people.
Okay.
But I haven't kept up.
Yeah.
And I always knew that California was completely different.
Completely.
So I never even attempted to learn their system.
So every year, all 50 states create their Medicaid budget, and a subset of that is their long-term care budget. And then when they submit the Medicaid budget to the federal government, the government matches it either dollar for dollar, if it's a poor state, that's the words they use, or 50 cents on the dollar if it's not a poor state. So for example, Mississippi is considered a poor state because the average household income is below a certain line, arbitrary line that the federal government says, so Mississippi is a poor state. So if they submit a $500 million in Medicaid budget, the federal government will match Mississippi dollar for dollar. So they get $1 billion budget. In Arizona, we're not considered a poor state. So our average household income comes over the line. So we get 50 cents on the dollar for every dollar that we submit. So if we submit $1 billion for our budget, we end up with a $1.5 billion budget because the government gives us 50 cents on the dollar. So the point is, I've had a lot of clients say to me, I don't want to be a burden on society. I don't want to be a ward of the state. I don't want to take money when I don't have to. And my answer to them is, first of all, good for you. I get it. I don't want to be a burden either. But you've paid into the system through your federal and state income taxes your whole life. So if you're eligible for this program, take advantage of it. It's going to save you $72,000 a year, and you've paid into it ever since you were a working adult. Why wouldn't you take advantage of it? It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the requirements to qualify. Do you want
Sure.
to tell people? So I understand there's a 3-part test, right? So an asset limit,
Yeah.
income limit, and then a physical needs. Am I
Yeah,
close?
and you're actually even missing a part so I talk about it as there's 2 components, medical and financial. So you call the physical requirement. I just try to make it simple for people. So you have to be both medically eligible and financially eligible on the day that you apply, right? So medical is basically here in Arizona. There's something called the PASS, another acronym, stands for pre-authorization screening, and it's basically an interview that Altcs will conduct, typically over the phone, with the applicant and their primary caregiver. And they're going to ask a whole bunch of questions about the activities of daily living and cognitive type questions. And
Let me
ultimately,
tell you this: does this ever happen? Someone's too proud to say, "I
All
need help with this."
the time.
No, yeah, I can dress myself.
Yeah.
I can go to the bathroom myself.
Absolutely. I
I
dress
can-
myself. I get out of bed, no problem.
Yeah.
And then they end up not being medically eligible when in fact they need help with all that stuff. So my firm, just to kind of segue into that,
Which totally makes sense, right? You get people that go to these interviews, they send
of course.
someone there, and it's
These are the golden the golden age, right? These are people who grew up in the 30s, 40s, 50s, World War II, Korea. They're tough, right? I don't need help with that. But so what my firm does is we do pre-pass coaching for our clients. So we sit down with the applicant if they're going to be on the pass call, and we sit down with the caregiver, and we're like, here's how to approach this.
It's all about your worst days, right?
It's not your worst day.
It's
That's exactly right.
Yeah, no,
Because on your worst day is the day you're going to fall down, break your hip, and go to the hospital. So anyway, the medical, what we're looking to do is figure out what are you going to score on the pass. And today, a passing pass is 60 points. So through a combination of all of the needs that you have and requirements that you have for care, you need to score 60 points. They're going to look at that interview.
Passing pass means you qualify, means
You're medically eligible for the program.
You have enough needs, or
You have enough needs.
are those the ADLs too? The activities of daily
That's
living?
part of the pass, is figuring out what kind of help you need with the ADLs. And in Arizona, there's 7 ADLs. Other states have 5 or 6. Here we actually have 7, which is good because the more ADLs, the more points you can score. And then you can score points for your medical records too. So like if you have a formal dementia diagnosis, that's 20 out of the 60 points. If you need full-time oxygen, that's like 10 out of 60 points. And there's other things that, maybe in your medical history that can score you points.
Now, is it harder for people with like mental illness? It seems like I've seen kind of like a gap where people, they can't take care of themselves, but yet they don't meet the requirements.
There's an entire different branch of the Arizona Department of Health that handles people that have mental illness. So whether it's psychosis or neurosis or whatever it is, because there's so many different diagnoses these days for mental illness, Altcs is not for the mentally ill. It's just not. Like, that's the way that they wrote up the program. And they don't consider Alzheimer's or forms of dementia necessarily a mental illness. It's a cognitive condition, but it's not a mental illness. But if you're psychotic, right, and dangerous to yourself and others, and you're going to go to a different branch of the government to get assistance than Altcs, just so you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any familiarity with that branch or how people what that process is?
No, it's like a whole
It's
different
just
thing.
I've seen people where I guess in that space, where they don't meet the requirements. And again, maybe they didn't have a coach or someone that helped them too.
That's what it is, right?
If they just kind of go on this on their own and get rejected.
Yeah. So back at home on my computer, I have notes around like what the phone number is to call and what the website URL is to go to for this particular branch of the Arizona Department of Health. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Maybe we can put some of those in the links and some of the things.
Yeah, sure.
So
Let's do that.
So
that's the medical side. So you have to be medically eligible, and we, my firm will do a medical assessment, a medical eligibility assessment before we go any further with the client. So when a client comes on board,
I thought this was really cool. So that you're set up for this. So
100%, because there's no point, and in fact, we can do as a fiduciary we don't want to do any harm, right? Financial or otherwise. If we start moving money around and shifting assets around and helping people with, with their assets and their income, and then it turns out they're not medically eligible, we can end up doing harm, great harm, to that family or that person, that individual. So we don't want to do that. So the first thing we want to do is make sure, all right, are you going to score 60 points on the pass or not? And then those pre-screens fall into 3 buckets. Bucket 1 is eligible. So 60 points, or more. We've had people score 120 points on the pre-screen. It's like, for sure you're gonna, right? And then some people are on the bubble. So on the bubble, I would define as 55 points to 62 points, kind of in that range. And we'll come back to that. And then there's people that are below 55, and those people just probably aren't gonna be eligible yet, unless they have really extenuating medical circumstances. For example, they've fallen 3 times in the past month, hard. So maybe, they've recovered from that fall, but each fall has gotten progressively worse, and they've injured themselves progressively worse. And so they've recovered and they can do the activities of daily living. They wouldn't score 60 points, but the next fall they have, they're gonna crack their head open or something worse. For somebody like that, we would actually appeal. We would do what's called a physician's review as part of, and like no one knows to do this, but we do because this is what we do. But we would appeal for a physician's review and say, look, this person just fell 3 times in the past month. The next time they fall, they might kill themselves. Let's get them on the program so they can get the care that they need and not wait for them to die. And physician's review is like 100% of the time, again, knock wood, has agreed with us on things like that. And they've approved somebody that has otherwise scored below 60 points.
Yeah.
So that's the medical. On the financial side, this is actually the hairiest part. So there's an income eligibility requirement as part of the financial. There's a resource or asset eligibility requirement. And then there's a gifting or transfer eligibility requirement, which you probably know is the 5-year look back.
Yeah.
So you have to actually be okay across all 3 of those sub areas of the financial. So let's just talk about income, because that one's fairly easy. Every year they change, and sometimes they change it mid-year, but there's an income cap. And your gross income for 2024 can't be over $2,829. That's the income cap. If it is over, there's actually a remedy that you can use called a Miller Trust, which is what it's known as nationally, or an IoT, an income-only trust, which I'm sure you've heard of, as you're aware. So income-only trust is Arizona specific. It's literally the same exact thing.
And essentially what those trusts, it just gives the excess income to Altcs, right?
It gives the excess income to your care provider. It's not to Altcs.
Okay.
So if
there's care providers under Altcs, is that how it works?
The care provider is getting paid by a program contractor, which is basically a health insurance company that contracts with Altcs. So now we're getting into the weeds, and it's like really hairy, like who bills and who gets the money. But basically, Altcs does the eligibility, and then once you're determined if you're eligible or not, you get passed off to a program contractor, like United Healthcare, for example. It used to be Mercy Care, and there's a few others, but they're the ones that from that point on assign you to a case manager and handle all of your billing and payment and everything else, and make sure that you get the benefits that you're supposed to get. So actually the program contractor implements Altcs once you're on, and Altcs handles, the actual state branch handles the eligibility before you're on.
Okay.
So it's pretty wild. You get passed off. So anyway.
All right. I guess the short answer is if you're over the income, you're not. There's still solutions for you. You're not dead in the water.
No.
If you have more income.
Here's how I would say it. Whatever your cost of care is, if your income is $1,000 or more below your cost of care, Altcs probably makes sense for you. And we can use a Miller Trust or an income-only trust to get you down below the income limit, to get you that gap, to get Altcs to pay for that gap. The bigger that gap is between your income and your cost of care, to me, the more acute your need for Altcs is going to be.
Yeah.
So my example is you make $2,000 from Social Security, your cost of care is $8,000. That $6,000 gap is 300% more than your income every month. You need Altcs.
Yeah, you're
right?
happy to give up that $2,000 to get $6,000 paid.
100%. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So we talked about the income limit.
Yep.
So the other one is kind of like an asset limit.
Resources, yeah.
Resources.
So this
payment
one's
limit.
really complex.
Yeah, that's where it gets real fun. Huh?
It gets real fun.
Because with the married couple, you have that's where it gets interesting, right? You have the well spouse, and then they call it the sick spouse, or what do they call it?
The ill spouse.
The ill
is how we refer to it.
Yeah.
So a married. It's almost probably easier to start with somebody who's unmarried.
Okay, that's right there.
Excuse me, because it's a little simpler.
Yeah.
So, as a unmarried person, whether you're widowed, divorced, or never married before, you can't have more than $2,000 in what's called spendable resources the day that you apply for Altcs. So, what I like to tell people is, if you have a savings account with $2,001 in it, they will decline you for being over-resourced, which is bonkers to me, but that's how it works.
Or if like your checking and savings total more than that.
If you total up any of your spendable assets, now there's certain assets that are exempt, and that's good news because we can actually use that to our advantage.
Before we talk about those, is there assets counted that people don't think of in that?
All the time.
What are some things that people don't think of in that $2,000 limit?
Oh my
so you have like your checking and savings. How about
IRA,
like Coinbase?
Yeah.
You look at that.
Coinbase account counts.
Yeah, cryptocurrency.
Yep, your cryptocurrency. Now, not many elderly people have Coinbase accounts, but it happens sometimes. I'll tell you the ones that people don't think about. They have a whole life policy that has a $5,000 cash balance in it that's been sitting in there for decades. That counts.
Yep.
They bought an annuity that they're basically receiving income from. Well, that annuity has a surrender value. That surrender value counts towards your resource limit. If you've got timeshare, oh my gosh, this one's gnarly.
Timeshares count?
Timeshare can
Oh my gosh.
you can sell
one more
because
bad thing.
it's a transferable. I know one more bad thing about timeshare, because it's a transferable asset that you could theoretically sell if somebody was actually going to ever buy it.
Does that trigger things, or do people prove that they're worthless most of the time?
Getting into timeshares a little bit, the way that we get around it, and it's legal to do, is if you list the timeshare for sale at the time that you apply for Altcs, they will exempt the asset's worth.
There you go. So you're trying to sell it then.
You're trying to
sell it. Great, let's sell it.
The truth is, no one wants to buy your timeshare.
Right.
So you're never going to sell it. But as long as it's for sale at the time that you apply, they'll kind of put that into the exempt bucket.
That makes sense. That's easy enough then.
So,
to actually sell it if you can.
Right. It's easy enough. And we know to do that because this is what we do. But a lot of people who don't know that report it on their list of assets, and they're like, oh, they're never going to count it. And then they get declined because of the timeshare, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
It's just silly. So the exempt assets, there's three main assets that you can exempt. One, which is the most important one, is your primary residence.
As long as it's not in trust, right?
It can't be titled to a trust.
Yeah,
So
that's like in Arizona, I'd say that's only a downside to a trust.
Yes.
It's probably the only time.
Right,
So like for
right.
that specific reason.
Yes.
But even then, it may be advantageous to have it start in a trust.
You can always pull it out of the trust.
Yeah.
And I'll this. You should probably know this is how we do it. Is Altcs will always ask, when you apply, are you a trustee of a trust, a beneficiary of a trust, or in any way tied to any type of a trust? If so, submit the trust documents because we want to see the wording of that trust. When you do that, the trust document has to go to what's called the policy department at Altcs, which is a bunch of lawyers who make $75,000 a year, which isn't a lot if you're a lawyer. And all they do is sit around and look at other people's trust documents to see to look for reasons to decline people. So what I like to tell people is, if you have a living trust, family trust, and all you have is your house in it, let's not only retitle the property back to the married couple's name, but let's dissolve the trust for now, so that we can legally say we're not beneficiaries or trustees of the trust. That way you take the policy attorneys out of it, you speed up the process, like light speed, compared to if it goes to policy, it's going to take months because they're so backed up and they're so slow and they don't care.
Yeah.
So but otherwise, as long as the equity that you have in the primary residence is under $800,000. So
okay, there is a cap.
There's a cap. You could have $1 million house. If you owe $200,000 on your mortgage, you're okay. You can have an $800,000 house, and if you own it free and clear, you're okay. But if you own $1 million house and you own it free and clear,
you better get a mortgage.
You better get or get a reverse mortgage, right? Or something. Yeah.
Or so if it's $1 million, they I guess they just count the value. You don't qualify.
They count the value,
is
right?
how it is.
So you basically have to sell your house before you apply, and then spend that money down.
That makes sense. So they're saying your house is too nice. You can't have that. Nice
You don't
in
need
a house.
Altcs. You live in a nice house.
Yeah, sell your house.
Right. But what's interesting is you could have a $2 million house, but if you owe $1.2 million, you're still okay. So it's really not tied to how nice of a house you're in, even though I can understand it's really tied to how much equity that you have.
Yeah.
Right. If you've got over that $800,000 in equity, then it's too much, and they want you to spend that down before you come to them with your hand out.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I was aware of the equity limit.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer. We rarely run into that. Usually people have, people that come to us are below that.
Yeah, but it's getting kind of more and more common though the last few years. With real estate.
It's true.
It's
true.
I guess 5 years ago that was a lot less people with 800,000
Yeah,
of
well,
equity
real
than there
estate's-
is now.
Yeah, for sure. So the second exempt asset is one vehicle. So a lot of families have multiple vehicles. You got to pick one. Pick the most expensive one.
So a married couple can only have one excluded vehicle.
One excluded vehicle. If they have two vehicles, the second vehicle is going to count towards their resource cap.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the third exempt asset is prepaid funeral expenses, as long as they're irrevocable. So if you go to a funeral home and you say, hey, here's $15,000, buy me a plot of land, give me a prepaid headstone and a coffin, and make it where I can't come to you for a refund, then that counts towards an exempt asset, because you can't transfer it, you can't give it back. It's exempt.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So those are the big three. Otherwise, anything else that you can possibly think of, that's not true. I guess there's a fourth that doesn't really come up very often, which is your personal effects. So your clothing, your wedding ring, your jewelry, your stamp collection.
Wedding ring comes up a lot. People,
Yeah.
am I gonna have to sell my wedding ring?
No, all that's okay. They don't want your personal effects. They're not in the business. Altcs isn't in the business of trying to create valuations for wedding rings and stamp collections and stuff like that. Now, I will say, if you bought an expensive painting for investment purposes in the past few years, that's something that they're going to say, that's not a personal effect. That's an investment piece. Sell the painting and use that to pay down your expenses before you come to us.
That's if you bought the painting for an investment, or how do they make the distinction?
Well, they're gonna look back 5 years at every transaction that you either had come in or go out over $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were up in Park City, Utah, and you're kind of looking around the art galleries and you see something you like, and you stroke a $50,000 check for a painting, that's going to show up in the 5-year look back, right? Because they're going to see that transaction for $50,000, and they're going to say, what is this to XYZ gallery in Park City, Utah? They already know what it is.
Yeah.
You bought a piece of art. So you have to disclose that you bought that, whether you bought it for aesthetic purposes or not. If it's in the past 5 years, they're going to assume you bought it for investment purposes and it's gone up in value. And they want you to sell that piece and add that to your spendable resources before you can apply for Altcs.
Okay, but as to transactions before that look back, they're not going to know. They're not going to say, oh, your art is.
No, it's not going to show up.
That's if you bought that for investment.
The other thing you can do is you can say, I want to keep the painting, but then the value of the painting has to be a part of your total resource exemption, which is about, let's just say $130,000, give or take.
Okay.
Right? The spouse, the ill spouse can only have $2,000. The healthy spouse can have the other $130,000. Maybe it's $140 now, somewhere in that range. So you could say, I'm going to take that.
I knew it was around $100,000. So
it's gone up 40% probably since then, maybe even 50. So you could say that the painting that I bought in Park City is going to be a part of that exempt resource, but then you've got less cash to spend because you just got this painting sitting on the wall. So what we do is we sit down with the family. When a family has assets, we help the family sift through the assets and figure out what makes the most sense to keep, what makes the most sense to liquidate, and then we help them liquidate it for the highest value that they possibly can so they can get some value out of it. So we have car brokers we work with to help you liquidate your cars. And we have precious metal collectors that help you, liquidate your gold coins and your silver coins and that kind of thing.
Nice. So when is the best time to plan for Altcs? Like, let's say people like in their like that. But what can people be doing? Let's say someone like in their 50s or 60s and healthy.
Yeah.
Like, is there many things they can even be doing?
Yeah.
I don't know if the long-term care, does that make sense for many people anymore?
It does.
Okay.
It does, and I would probably guide them to a certain type of policy that makes sense for an older client. But look, I have 25-year-old wealth management clients that I am constantly talking to about long-term care. And I'm like, look, you don't have to put a lot of money towards it at that young age. If you're in your 50s and 60s, yeah, you got to put a substantial amount of money towards it because you're older. So you're closer to the need. I do think that there's insurance solutions that make sense. It very much depends upon the health of the person, the age of the person, the gender of the person, all of that. But I'm really glad you asked the question because we have a $2,000 offering, what we call pre-planning, where you don't need long-term care now, but again, there's an 80% chance that you will. Do you want to be prepared? Because the longer the runway you have, the easier the flight's going to be, right? The problem is 99% of the people that come to us have no runway and they want to take the plane off.
Yeah.
And it's like, how's that going to look, right? It's ugly. So what I try to communicate to people is come see us for pre-planning as young as you possibly can, because we can kind of give you some guidance. We will give you guidance on how to structure your assets appropriately in coincidence with your estate planning attorney, in coincidence with your CPA to make sure it's, tax advantaged, tax optimized. And so that by the time you get there, you're going to land the plane or take the plane off or whatever analogy you want to use in the most efficient way possible. Yeah,
it definitely helps. The more time you have, the better. I had my license at one point, so my insurance license and things, and it seems like at one point it seemed like kind of the long-term care seemed cost prohibitive for a lot of people, but it seemed like there was kind of like sneaky ways, I call them sneaky ways, but like life insurance with living benefits or like annuities that had long-term care benefits.
That's right, and that's kind of what I was getting at before. I'm a big fan of something called IUL, Index Universal Life, because the big problem with homogeneous long-term care insurance is if you don't use it, you lose it. It's like car insurance. Like most people over the course of their life are going to have an accident or something's going to happen. Somebody's going to ding their car. They're going to need their car insurance policy. But the truth is you could pay for decades on your car insurance, and if you don't put in a claim, that money's sunk. Long-term care insurance in the 80s and 90s was the same way. If you bought a long-term care insurance policy back in the 80s and 90s and you end up not needing it, first of all, bravo that you don't need it. But second of all, that's a bummer because you just spent how many tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars that are gone and gone forever. Index Universal Life Insurance has so many, it's like a Swiss Army knife. It's got a death benefit because it's life insurance. It also has an investment component that builds cash value over time. And then it's got long-term care built into it as well. So if you need long-term care, it's there. If you don't need long-term care, you've got a death benefit for your heirs, or you've got an asset component that's growing value that you can draw against tax-free, like a Roth IRA, in your later years. So that's usually what I set people up with, is something like an IUL policy.
Nice. That has some of those long-term care benefits.
Correct.
And things.
Yeah, that way if you need it, it's there, and if you don't, it's good for something else besides just long-term care.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Any other Altcs myths you want to hit?
I've got a few of them.
Okay.
What are some? We've talked about a few of them. Yeah, we've talked about a few of them. I just want to pull up my list here so I make sure I don't forget them.
How about this one? I'll bring some that I hear.
Yeah.
So, should I get divorced? People ask me that one. People love to ask that one.
Yeah, I get asked that a lot too. So, divorce is almost always a bad idea for Altcs. I understand why people think that it's a workaround. First of all, can you imagine being married 50 years and now you're going to divorce because they need care?
Yeah, they're sick on their deathbed.
Isn't that crappy? Yeah. But I understand why people think that might make sense, and it's a
I don't know if it ever did. I don't know if it did 20 or 30 years ago.
It did, and people were doing it. People were doing it, and then the George W. Bush administration passed a law called the Deficit Reduction Act, was like in 2006. And as part of the Deficit Reduction Act, they made it possible to basically protect the assets, a marital couple's assets, for the well spouse using a very specific strategy. And and you and I have talked about this like offline, but I'll mention it here on the video. The strategy is called a Medicaid compliant annuity. So let's just say you've got a married couple with $500,000. And remember, the resource cap is, let's just say $140,000, right? So you've got $360,000 over that cap. If you went to Altcs and applied, they would say, you're declined, go spend $360,000 and then come back to us, right? Well, using a Medicaid compliant annuity, you can actually take that $360,000, put it into an annuity, have that annuity pay back to the well spouse, who's the person who would have divorced in your question, right? So instead of divorcing your spouse, put this money into an annuity, and then over time, it'll pay that full $360,000 back with a little bit of interest.
Yeah, so that in that case, the asset they're over the asset limit, but the other spouse can have more income. Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly. So you lose the
to
$360,000
turn the asset
into an income source.
into income.
Right. And then my firm, we manage these Medicaid compliant annuities to where they pay back to the well spouse as quickly as legally possible. So like if we can pay it back inside of a year, we'll do it. Basically what we have to do is pass the sniff test. Remember I mentioned Altcs policy, that Department of Attorneys that said it. So the Medicaid compliant annuity contract has to go to policy for review. So they look at the contract and they look at the numbers and they want to know how much money are you putting in and how fast are you getting it back. There are situations like if you had a $360,000 annuity and you were paying it back over 3 months, so $120,000.
They can pay that quick sometimes?
The annuities will. The annuity company doesn't care.
But it might not be compliant.
But it might not be compliant with policy department. So we know what those ratios look like, and the point is, we have it paid back to the well spouse as quickly as humanly possible. It's interesting because the Medicaid compliant, and there's a little seedy, trashy little corner of the market that we're in, where people will try to throw you into an annuity and extend the annuity term out as long as they possibly can. And the reason why is because they make a commission when they do that. And the longer the annuity goes, the longer the insurance company has your money, the bigger the commission they pay to the agent who's writing the annuity.
Yeah, I've seen some people, they got hit with those.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. The only way they get sold with a big fat commission.
That's right.
And those brokers are.
And so now here's the well spouse, the 80-year-old lady who was just about to divorce her husband, who's like, oh great, I'm gonna go buy this annuity. And the annuity pays back over 20 years. So she's gonna be 100 when she finally gets her money back. So she loses, right? And the sick spouse loses. And the only person that makes out is the insurance agent. And we just think that that's crappy.
Yeah.
So we try to have it paid back inside of a year if we can, and if it can't because the amount is too big, we have it paid back as quickly as possible. And if we make a commission, we'll disclose it, but we're not in it for the commission. We're in it to be fiduciaries and do the right thing.
Yeah. It's those don't pay as good, huh? Doing the right thing.
No, it doesn't.
It's a long game though.
But I sleep well at night.
Yeah.
And you can't pay for sleep, man. Like,
yeah.
No amount of money will help you sleep at night. So
yeah, those advisors that are doing that, they don't stick around, right? Those are the guys that are in and out of town.
They've got 1 Yelp ratings, right? And 1-star Yelp ratings and stuff.
They're in the business for a few months and then out.
All right, so let's bang through some of these myths. So one I have is, and we talked about a couple of these. Most people make too much money monthly in order to get on the Altcs program. I heard my case manager at the hospital told me I make too much money monthly because my Social Security payment is $2,500.
Nope, there's ways with that though, right? With
Miller Trust.
You can sign the excess income.
That is a myth. And unfortunately, I have so many people who don't call me because the well-meaning but misinformed case manager at Banner Hospital told them that they make too much money and they wouldn't get approved.
Yeah, it's kind of like estate planning too. There's so much bad advice out there regarding it.
It drives me crazy.
Yeah. And it's funny, it's sad who people will listen to.
Listen to anybody. Especially when you're in crisis, right? And you're like, what do I do? And then you have this case manager who acts like they know everything. Nothing against case managers, they're great. But anyway, so that's the first one. The second one is, we talked about it, you have to spend down all of your assets to get on the Altcs program. That's not true.
Yeah, and some good exclusions.
There's exclusions, and then there's, obviously some amount of assets you can keep, and then you can use strategy. By the way, the Medicaid compliant annuity isn't the only strategy that you can use. You can buy real estate portfolio and put it into an LLC and convert that asset into an income source.
Oh,
right?
So that's nice. I
let's
haven't
say
heard that one.
you got $1 million. This one's really sexy. You have $1 million. You could go out and buy three $333,000 houses, right? Rent them out, and as long as the capex that you're making is over 6%. So basically, your rent has to be at least 6% of that million. So 60, as long as your capex is over 6%, it's a legal income source
And no longer
an asset.
Really? So they don't look at that as an asset.
No. So we've used that for people that are trying to save. We had a man with dementia was married to a woman 20 years younger, and they had a 13-year-old daughter. And this poor guy had raging dementia. And the wife was like 40 years old. He was 60. The daughter is 13. And she's looking at his memory care bill, and it was like $9,000 a month. And physically, he's a healthy 60-year-old guy. Like, you would look at him and say, I could picture him out on the pickleball court right now.
Yeah.
But he's got raging dementia. And she's like, he could live 20 years. I'm going to spend $5 million on his care, and we're going to be broke. So we took a bunch of their excess assets, created an LLC, bought a real estate portfolio for them. And I know tons of real estate people. So we bought a really cool real estate portfolio for them, converted it into an income source for her, and got him on the program. And she was like eternally grateful. So there are other strategies, is the point, but just Medicaid compliant annuities.
Yeah. And we didn't even get into the making a large gift and waiting 5 years too.
That's right.
Is another thing too.
Yeah.
So,
well, if you had foresight.
Yeah, and
I would hire Rilus.
Well, I don't do those types of.
Oh, you don't do Revocable Trusts. Okay.
So, but yeah, if you plan far enough ahead, right?
Yeah.
So you're doing the planning, you
Right.
can move some of the things.
Yeah. I mean, the smart way to do it from a tax advantage perspective is you put it into an irrevocable trust 5 years in advance. Because you can fund the trust, you don't have to pay gift tax on that.
Yeah.
You're not limited to $17,500 a year.
There's still some consideration. I see. One thing is with like IRAs. If that's the asset they have, they got to get hit with the income tax. If they have too much in IRAs.
Yes. And that's an Arizona thing. I use Idaho as an example because they have one of the most friendly Medicaid laws of any state in the country. IRAs are exclusatory; they're exempt assets.
Oh wow!
In Idaho, but they're not in Arizona. So if you have $1 million sitting in your IRA, all sitting tax deferred, and you apply for Altcs, they're going to say you got to cash out that IRA, and then you're going to be on the hook for $350,000, $400,000 in tax.
Yeah, all the income tax.
Huge tax bomb.
The other thing I see too is they're going to make a gift of real estate. You have the low basis; it's carryover basis typically.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
Lots of fun stuff to work out.
What else do we have here? Altcs will take your Social Security and your home if you get on the program. Have you heard that one?
They just take everything from the program.
Yeah. So Altcs, they do expect you, if you're going to move into a memory care facility or an assisted living or a skilled nursing, they do expect you to pay what's called room and board. So if you're moving into an $8,000 scenario and you make $2,000, they're going to say, well, let's say $1,800 of that is your room and board. We do expect you to pay something towards, you were paying already on rent or mortgage or whatever on your house. So now we're expecting you to pay a little bit towards your room and board at this community that you're moving into. We'll pay the rest. So if your Social Security is $2,000 and you're expected to pay $1,800 in room and board, people start saying, "Oh, you're taking my Social Security." Well, we're not taking your Social Security. You're expected to pay a little bit towards your share of cost. That's what it's called, is room and board share of cost. The other bit is the law that George W. Bush passed, the Deficit Reduction Act, also made it legal for Medicaid to claw back from your estate any dollar amount that they contributed towards your care while you were alive. So let's just say, again, you have dementia, you're in care for 5 years, $100,000 a year, it's $500,000. When you pass away and your spouse passes away, assuming you're married, they can go to the estate and try and reclaim that $500,000 that they paid towards your care. And the way that they typically do that is they put a lien on your home. So people convert that into, oh, you're taking my house from me. No, we're not taking your house from you. We're going to put a lien on your home. Not we, the Altcs will put a lien on your home. And then when both spouses pass away, they want that home to be sold, and they want to get as much as they can from the proceeds of the sale of that house back as a reclaim, or what's called recovery. So people tell the myth, oh, well, you're going to take my home. No, they're not. And by the way, if you have a child living in that house that can't afford to live anywhere else, you can create a special needs exclusion where Altcs won't put a lien on the house, or they won't take the house away until the child moves out.
Yeah, and then it's my understanding, as long as you avoid probate, so if they put the lien on there, they can enforce it.
Right.
But I think it's another reason to avoid probate, right? If there's no assets that go through probate, everything's transferred to the next generation. It's harder for the state to make their
The
claim.
best way to do that with real estate. Remember, you can't have the home in the trust when you apply for Altcs.
Yeah, then it counts.
So what you do is when you retitle it back to the individuals, you use a beneficiary deed.
Yeah.
Do you do those?
That's the only time that makes sense, I think.
You're right.
Because usually I like trust better for other reasons.
100%.
But only for that reason, yeah.
For that reason. So a beneficiary deed, as you know, basically when the owner of the home passes away, if you have a transfer on death bank account, it's the same thing. You show up to the county recorder with a death certificate and a beneficiary deed, the house is yours now. So before Altcs has a chance to even put a lien on the home, it's already transferred to, let's say, the child or the spouse or whatever. So it's a legal way to circumnavigate that recovery that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Sean. Thanks for coming out and do this. I think it's interesting. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. Do you want to tell everyone again where they can find you?
Yeah,
with resources.
Sure. So again, John Michaels, Stronghold Financial. If you go to www.strongholdfin.com, there's a whole section right there on the homepage that says Medicaid. Click on that. It'll take you through all the information. And of course, you can always reach out. The phone number is posted on our website.
All right, great. Thank you. I'll try to look at the comments since we're not live here on the recording. If you have comments, we'll try to look at them or questions. And then if John does look at those, I'll try to send them over his way. Maybe we can get them back here again. All right, thanks, John.
Thank you.